The accusation spread through the town like a spark dropped into dry grass, quick and hungry. By mid-morning, whispers had hardened into certainty, and certainty had turned into judgment. Clara Moreno felt it before she heard it, the way conversations stopped when she passed, the way eyes followed her steps as if counting them, measuring guilt by the sound of her boots on the hard-packed earth. She had come into town early that day, a basket of mended clothes folded neatly over her arm. The Dalton ranch hands trusted her work. She stitched their torn sleeves and patched their worn pockets, always careful, always fair. She was planning to leave the basket at the general store for pickup when the sheriff's voice rang out across the square, sharp as a cracked whip. Clara Moreno, stop right there. Her heart lurched. The basket slipped slightly in her grip, and for a moment she thought she might drop it, spill the evidence of her honest labor at her feet. She turned slowly, forcing her shoulders straight, forcing her breath to steady. The square had filled without her noticing. Ranchers, shopkeepers, women with flowers still on their hands, boys standing on barrels for a better look. All of them watching her. The sheriff cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable, hat in his hands. You're being accused of theft. Silverware taken from the Dalton house late last night. A murmur rippled through the crowd, swelling like a tide. Clara's mind raced. Silverware. She hadn't been near the Dalton house in days. The words felt unreal, as if spoken in a language she barely understood. I didn't take anything, she said. Her voice sounded too small in the open air, but it didn't break. She clenched her jaw, refusing to let it tremble. I wasn't there. Someone laughed, sharp and humorless. Who else would it be? Another voice called. She's always around rich folks' things. The words stung more than she expected. Clara felt heat rush to her face, a mix of shame and anger. She wanted to shout, to demand why honesty always had to prove itself while suspicion walked free. But she knew better. In this town, raised voices from people like her were rarely heard as truth. At the edge of the square, Caleb Dalton leaned against the hitching post, arms crossed. Dust clung to his boots, and the brim of his hat shadowed his eyes. He had ridden in from the south pasture less than an hour ago, only to find his family name buzzing on every tongue. His mother's silver, engraved with a rose, passed down through generations, gone without a trace. When he'd heard Clara's name, something in him had gone still. He watched her now, standing alone in the middle of the square, hands tight around her basket, eyes dark and steady despite the fear swimming just beneath the surface. He had known her most of his life. She had been a thin, quiet girl once, bringing water to her father as he fixed fence posts on the Dalton land. She'd grown into a woman who kept to herself, worked hard, and never asked for more than she earned. This didn't sit right. Search her place, a man near the saloon called out. Others nodded eagerly, as if grateful someone had said it aloud. The idea took shape fast, solid and cruel. Clara lifted her chin. You won't find anything, she said. But go ahead, search it. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. 2 deputies followed her through the streets, the crowd trailing behind like a shadow. Caleb pushed off the hitching post and followed at a distance, his jaw tight. He told himself he was only curious. He didn't believe his own lie. Her room above the tailor's shop was small and neat. Sunlight filtered through a single window, illuminating spools of thread lined by color, folded fabric stacked with care, and a narrow bed tucked against the wall. There was no silver hidden under the mattress, no stolen treasure tucked into drawers. The deputies opened boxes, shook out blankets, looked behind the door. Nothing. One of them found the photograph, worn soft at the edges, and held it up. Clara's stomach twisted until she saw it return gently to the shelf. Her breath eased a fraction. She's clean, the deputy said. Disappointment flickered across several faces. The sheriff rubbed his neck. Clara, he said, quieter now, you're free to go. But, best stay clear of the Dalton place for a while. As if she ever went there uninvited. She nodded once, too tired to argue, and stepped past them. When she descended the stairs, she nearly collided with Caleb. He tipped his hat, a brief, respectful gesture. For a moment, their eyes met. She searched his face for accusation and found none, only something thoughtful, something troubled. I didn't do it, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. I know, Caleb replied. The simplicity of it almost undid her. She swallowed hard and walked on, refusing to let herself look back. That night, the Dalton house felt wrong. Caleb moved through the rooms with a lantern, its light stretching shadows along familiar walls. He opened drawers, checked cabinets, ran his hand along shelves where the silver should have been. The rose engraving should have caught the light, should have winked at him the way it always had when his mother polished it. Instead, there was only absence. He checked the barn next, then the tack room, then his own room again, frustration gnawing at him. Finally, he sank into a chair in the hallway and rubbed his face. The house creaked softly, settling around him. He thought of Clara's steady voice, her calm in the face of judgment, and felt a twist of unease. As he rose, the lantern beam swept across the back door. Something dark marked the floor near the threshold. He knelt, touching it with 2 fingers. Mud, fresh, still damp. Caleb frowned. He hadn't been near the creek that day. He straightened slowly, the weight of a new thought pressing down on him. If Clara hadn't brought trouble into his house, then trouble had already been there, quiet and unseen, wearing a familiar face. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying the last whispers of the day's accusation into the night. Morning came pale and uneasy, the kind of dawn that felt like it was holding its breath. Caleb had barely slept. The image of the muddy footprint by the back door replayed itself every time he closed his eyes, refusing to settle into anything harmless. When the first gray light slipped through the curtains, he rose, pulled on his boots, and moved through the house with deliberate quiet. The floorboards creaked softly beneath his weight, familiar sounds that now felt like questions. He followed the faint trail he'd noticed the night before, crouching near the back door again to be sure it hadn't been his imagination. The mud was still there, darker against the clean wood, leading inward instead of out. Someone had come from the creek, not toward it. That alone tightened his chest. He traced the marks down the hallway, past his mother's room, past the parlor, until they faded near the pantry. Caleb opened the pantry door slowly. Shelves of jars and sacks stared back at him, orderly and innocent. He knelt, peering under the bottom shelf, then stood and checked behind the door. Nothing. For a moment doubt crept in, whispering that he was chasing shadows. Then he noticed the guest room door wasn't fully closed. The room smelled faintly of dust and old linen. It hadn't been used since before winter, not until Eli arrived with his easy grin and his talk of bad luck chasing him from place to place. Caleb knelt and reached beneath the bed. His fingers brushed cloth, then metal. He drew it out carefully. The silver lay wrapped in a flour sack, dull but unmistakable. The rose engraving caught the light, familiar as a memory. Caleb stared at it, his pulse thudding in his ears. Relief washed over him first, sharp and overwhelming. Then came anger, slow and heavy, settling into his bones. Footsteps sounded in the kitchen. Caleb rose, the silver heavy in his hand, and stepped into the doorway. Eli stood at the table, pouring coffee into a chipped mug, humming as if it were any ordinary morning. He wore a clean shirt, his boots freshly brushed, like a man preparing to leave without fuss. Eli glanced up and froze when he saw what Caleb held. "Well," Eli said after a moment, forcing a laugh, "you found it." Caleb didn't return the smile. "You want to explain why it was under your bed?" Eli shrugged, setting the coffee down. "Temporary storage. I wasn't going to keep it long." "And the mud by the back door?" Caleb asked. "You think I wouldn't notice?" Eli leaned back against the table, folding his arms. "You always were observant. That's why I figured you'd put it together eventually." Caleb stepped closer, his voice low. "You let them accuse Clara." Eli's eyes flickered. Town needed someone to blame. It was either her or you. "That wasn't the choice," Caleb said. Eli's jaw tightened. "Look, I needed money. Just until I got on my feet. That silver was just sitting there. No harm done. No harm." Caleb's hand clenched around the heirloom. He thought of Clara standing alone in the square, of the way people's eyes had cut into her. "You don't get to decide what harm is." Silence stretched between them, thick and brittle. Finally, Caleb set the silver on the table, placing it carefully, as if calming something skittish. "You're leaving," he said. "Now. And you're coming with me first." Eli opened his mouth to argue, then saw Caleb's expression and thought better of it. By the time they reached the town square, the sun was high enough to warm the ground, but the air still carried a chill. People gathered quickly, drawn by the sight of Caleb Dalton leading his cousin through the street. The sheriff stepped forward, concern written across his face. "What's this about?" he asked. Caleb lifted the silver for all to see. A murmur rippled through the crowd as recognition dawned. "This was stolen from my house," Caleb said. "But not by Clara Moreno." He told them everything, about the mud, the guest room, the flour sack. Eli tried to interrupt, but Caleb's steady voice drowned him out. When Caleb finished, the truth hung in the air, undeniable. The sheriff's shoulders sagged. He turned to Eli. Is this true? Eli looked around at the faces closing in, then dropped his gaze. I didn't think it'd go this far, he muttered. A collective breath seemed to release from the crowd. Eyes shifted, some falling to the ground, others turning toward the street where Clara stood at the edge, drawn there by rumor and curiosity. Caleb crossed the square to her. You were wronged, he said, his voice carrying. By my family, by my house, and I'm sorry. The word echoed, simple and rare. The sheriff cleared his throat. Clara Moreno, he said, your name is cleared. She nodded once, the tension easing from her shoulders. The weight that had pressed on her chest since the accusation finally lifted, leaving her lightheaded. Apologies came in low voices, awkward and uncertain. She accepted none of them outright, but she heard them. Eli was taken away, his luck finally run out. Later, when the square emptied and the day softened into afternoon, Caleb walked with Clara toward her home. The town felt different now, quieter, as if it were relearning itself. I should have spoken sooner, Caleb said, stopping at her door. I should have trusted what I knew. Clara studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, tired smile. You did trust it. You just took the long way around. He nodded, relief and something warmer settling in his chest. As he tipped his hat and turned away, the past felt finally set behind them, and the future, uncertain as it was, no longer carried the stain of a lie.